Hey everybody, welcome to our talk on powering innovation, how PowerX leverages Yes Energy data on the Snowflake marketplace. And let's get into some introductions. So I'm Sam Lokshin. I'm the technical product manager at Yes Energy for our programmatic data delivery product. So this is how we programmatically deliver our data to our customers. One of the main ways of which is through our listings on the Snowflake marketplace. A little bit about me. I have a bit more of a technical background. I started off in engineering and moved to product about 5 years ago. And personally, I like to dance, I like to party, so Snowflake Summit's right up my alley. And I like to do karaoke. And if you ever hang out with Yes, there's a bunch of karaokeers. So if you like that, definitely come hit us up. We're mostly out of Colorado. So Ian, would you like to introduce yourself and then introduce PowerX?
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Sam. So I'm Ian Matheson. I'm the Director of Data Systems at PowerX. As the Director of Data Systems, I manage our data platform on Snowflake, all of our data engineering. I also manage an application development team working on finance, mid-office, back-office products. I've been at PowerX for 8 years. We've been a Snowflake customer kind of since the beginning. We were here at the first conference in San Francisco, which was much smaller. And you know, in my spare time, I don't dance as much. I've got 3 kids at home, 8, 6, and 4. They keep me quite busy. But we're really excited to be here to talk about energy and data today. So who is PowerX? I know a few folks are kind of familiar with the kind of energy electricity space. We're the wholly owned subsidiary of BC Hydro, which is the utility in Vancouver, British Columbia. We're the energy marketing arm, which basically means we buy and sell electricity, natural gas, and renewable products for the benefit of our electorate, BC citizens. In terms of how big we are, we're a fairly small organization. We're only 230 people, and half of that is IT. So we develop a lot of in-house solutions, and for a small group, we deal with a lot of data. In terms of how much energy we move, we're a fairly big player in the West. So we trade over to Alberta and then all the way down to California and the desert Southwest and Arizona. We move about 22 terawatt hours of energy every year, about the equivalent power to power over 2 million households for a year. In terms of our data, to give you a sense from a structured data standpoint, we're about 122 terabytes of data in Snowflake across 5,000 tables. And that breadth is really one of the challenges in the energy space that Sam and I will talk about more, the breadth of data sources that we have. And it's a fairly high rate of change, so about 2 billion rows per day of data change. So there's a lot of data moving through our Snowflake system.
Cool, yeah, and I'll introduce Yes Energy, and before I do that, I just want to put you in the shoes of what it's like to be like someone in the power market space like an Ian or the traders he supports. So you can think of this as the daily crunch to make sense of it all. So imagine if you have millions of decisions of dollars on the line for your company, right, to make $1 million decisions for your company, and you've got billions of data points to sift through. And because our power markets exist at the intersection of physics, engineering, and economics, real life stuff happens, like transmission lines go down, power plants go out. That totally changes the electricity grid topology in localized areas. And on top of that, like you're doing data science and data analytics work, but the traders have to place trades every single day for the next day. So like you're on a super time crunch to get this done. So just imagine you've got to do all this. And that's really where Yes Energy comes into play. So we're really the data ops for power markets. So you can think of us as that data engineering layer for power market data. And so starting on the left-hand side of the slide, we collect data from over 1,200 data sources. Most of them are publicly available data sources. We also generate our own proprietary data. And these data sources publish data in a variety of formats. A lot of it's time series data. In fact, most of it's time series data. So they publish at 5-minute resolutions, hourly resolutions, daily resolutions. They publish interval beginning, interval ending. And we're the ones who are making sure that we collect, we clean, we standardize that data so it's usable to our customers like PowerX. So that's really where we come into play. So we're really focused on that data normalization. And so we collect about 750,000 data collections per day. And we have teams dedicated to making sure that the quality of the reports are just that they have quality. And then we insert those into a centralized database and we collect about 75 million rows of data per day. And then we deliver that through UI applications. And then we also have big delivery through the Snowflake marketplace with our data shares. And then our customers like PowerX, they're doing like data science and machine learning to participate in these markets. So we really look at it as a collaborative partnership with us and our customers. And I just want to show you all what it looks like, some of our user interface tools, just to ground you of what we first started off doing. So if you logged into the Yes Energy system, you can see that you can look at, like in the top right, there's Texas and like the electricity prices on the grid at the time. And you can really see the topology of the grid and like analyze the load or the demand for the electricity. You can analyze the generation that goes into that, like wind, solar, gas, et cetera. And so these are purpose-built tools in our UI. So I'm not really talking about this today, but just gives you a sense of like what we started off as. And so what Ian and I really want you to get out of our talk today is a story of like how we had these data challenges. And so data plumbing and data processing was really distracting from gathering insights from the data. And seamless data access, so convenient access to this data, was the end goal. And then, yes, and Snowflake achieved this goal via secure data sharing, and that's what we'll be talking about today. And for the agenda, we've got some really fun energy market, power market themed sections. So we've got energizing data at scale. So Ian's going to be talking about PowerX's journey with Snowflake. Then I'll talk about some of our lessons learned from providing data through the Snowflake marketplace and Wire to Share. And then finally, we'll talk about real-life applications empowering what matters in the business impact. So Ian, I'll hand it over to you for this section.
Thanks, Sam. So I'm just going to walk you through a little bit of PowerX's journey with Snowflake, including when and how we brought on data sharing and how we kind of thought of our data lifecycle through this. So what did we look like in what I call the BS times, the before Snowflake times? So this was our environment. We had a number of operational databases pulling in things like scheduling data, transmission data, market results, prices, and these were all operational databases. These are Oracle and Microsoft SQL Server. They didn't necessarily communicate with one another, and if you wanted to do analysis on that, you had to basically put all this SQL together to build a report. The way we did reporting was just a mess of SQL statements spread all over our organization. And we did have a number of data marts, but they suffered from fairly long lead times as they also needed to pull from all these disparate sources to put things together. Where our users actually consumed the data was Tableau, Excel, and Python. And Tableau was very popular because it could do the cross-database join, and that's how a lot of things were accomplished before we had anything else. So what were some of the challenges we had on this? Well, the first was, as you can probably see, it was operations first. And there's a couple of problems with that. The first is you could have long analytics queries that actually took down your operational data set. So that's a huge problem. And we're constantly monitoring our databases to make sure nothing was impacting operations. But the second was the data was actually organized and optimized for operations. So if anybody's worked on a database that an application team has built, they do not care if you're a secondary consumer. They don't care how it's structured. They're doing what's best for their application and not for anybody else. So it required a lot of work to, put things back together for analytics. The second was the technical barriers. So I've talked about having data in Oracle and SQL Server, and having those multiple technologies meant it required a lot of plumbing to actually have these systems talk to one another. You needed link servers, database links, you have performance issues with that, or you needed to get a whole new data mart built, and that was a long process to get done, again, because our data marts were still hitting our operational systems. And finally, this all led to a lack of self-service. It required a high level of technical skill to build anything. It could only really be done in a handful of BI tools or programmatically. And there was virtually no reuse in the organization. If you open a report, it didn't have what you need, good luck. You're probably starting from scratch. So when we thought about putting in our data platform about 7 years ago, we really wanted to design a data lifecycle that was going to work for what we knew, but also one that we could iterate on as our business changed and evolved. So what's on the left is the same as we had before. We started with our operational systems, and we knew these were the consumers at the time we had to meet, and we needed to fill in this black box in the middle here. And so the way we broke this down was we have raw to start with. That's where we land everything. We try to keep raw aligned with the source, so if someone's looking at it, they know exactly where it came from. This was before we had all the fancy lineage tools. They could look and know what database it came from. And the way we chose to populate this data was we went and got a change data capture tool. So it was HVR at the time. It's now a five-tran company. It really helped us start our project and get up to scale very quickly. So with HVR, we were able to replicate over 3,000 tables within just a matter of a few weeks in sub 10-minute latency into Snowflake. So as a way of getting started, I highly recommend looking at tooling that will allow you to do it at scale rather than building pipelines individually. Now, over time, we discovered that some of those sources weren't actually needed on-prem. They were only used for analytics. So where we had those, we've started replacing those with direct downloaders and using Snowpipe to ingest the data directly. And then once Snowflake came out with sharing, we were working with Yes Energy right away to say, can we get your data in the same place? But we had to figure out, once it was in the share, how do we slot it into our data lifecycle? So the Yes Energy comes in for us as just a raw database alongside our other data sets. It looks the exact same as if we were populating it from Fivetran or if we were loading it from Snowpipe. So the second piece of our data lifecycle we chose to call standardized. This is where we go from having many databases down to one, and everything is standardized as a view off of the raw tables. And what we've done here is when we initially started, we started by standardizing one thing, which is time, which seems trivial enough, but in the power industry, when you've got thousands of time series, lining up your hour-ending twos on long day across time zones is a non-trivial exercise. And we knew if we could deliver things standardized, we could add value to the business right away, because they could blindly join columns that were in UTC and know that everything aligns. Now, over time, this database has been a valuable place where we can actually layer more on. So this is where we now do master data. So if we want to translate plants to our global plant ID, then we do it at the standardized level. This is where we do data quality checks. In our industry, unfortunately, data quality and manual adjustments are big. There are sources that publish that will have wrong data and they will never go back and change it. And so if you want to do good time series analysis, you need to go in and put an adjustment on that to fix that data. So this was the one central place where we were able to do that. Then finally, in order to get the data actually out to consumers, we then move it into the data hub. A lot of that's done through custom views that we build, dynamic tables now. And we chose to break down our data hub into 3 buckets. I mean, everyone has their gold, silver, bronze, different ways they break this down. For us, it was HQ are high quality, S underscore are standardized. Those are kind of like the raw tables passed straight through. And then finally, the department underscore. And this is an area where if we want to enable self-service, we need to give departments a place where they can actually build. And so department underscore is where they can put views that is purpose-built for their team to use, but isn't necessarily at the high-quality bar to share with the rest of the organization, because not everything's going to meet that high-quality bar, and we still wanted a place for people to innovate. The other thing here is data marts. I think some people go into a data warehousing project now and think they don't need to model data or they don't need data marts. They will still be a big part of your ecosystem. Having people on your team who can do star schemas, dimension and fact modeling is critical for success. And then finally, here we added a few additional databases. So sandboxes we added initially. This was where we actually turned over ownership of the database to teams. And this was for our technical users to build everything they wanted. Get full access to the features, add new data, add dynamic tables, add tasks. They can really run wild in there without impacting anything else. And I'm sure, as many of you have heard, the notion of bringing your applications to your data, we have more and more apps being built directly on Snowflake, and they get their own databases here. The final piece of the architecture are the additional consumer tools that our consumers wanted. We didn't really anticipate this when we went to Snowflake, but over time, there's 3,000 partners in the expo hall there. There's a ton of different tools our consumers want to use on that data. We've added Hex for notebooking, Sigma from a BI perspective, and then Streamlit for app development into our standards. So how do we kind of build this and over what time frame? So our initial load was a 6-month project to build out. We had most of our data up there within a month, but then it took time to standardize everything and rebuild data marts. The process we went through here, it's kind of self-explanatory. We designed our lifecycle, we loaded data, we transformed the data, and then we got the users to use it. But we had to add all these pieces. In some ways, these are kind of the boring pieces that we all know that we need, but the security and governance layer. So how are we going to do access management, quality, master data, metadata, and then the last one I point to is cost management. For PowerX, this was our first major foray into the cloud, and Snowflake's got a great usage model, usage-based pricing model, but you need to have somebody who can watch it and understand it and report back on it and understand when things change, and you should think about that up front. We find this requires, we need to educate people on this every 6 months of our organization as things change, and you always need to be updating your stakeholders because the price drivers do change as your business evolves. And then the last piece on this whole thing is to iterate. The version we had 6 years ago didn't have all the pieces and bells and whistles we had today, but we knew we would have to iterate on this data life cycle. How are we going to fit in shares? How do we fit in dynamic tables? The benefit of these SaaS tools is that I don't need to go and do an upgrade like I need to on Oracle or SQL Server. I get all the features, but that also creates a burden on you. You have to figure out, how do I fit that in? Our users want to use these features, and now I need to fit them into our life cycle and figure out how to govern them. So it's a really critical part for the success of a Snowflake project. So I'm going to hand it over to Sam to talk a little bit about how Yes Energy set up their data share and listings.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. I was back there nodding my head to like everything he said, just because I know that how much work it goes in and how much of the success story has been on Snowflake for you all. So I want to talk about wired to share, so Yes Energy's data sharing strategy, so what works for us and some of our lessons learned from sharing with Snowflake. And before I do that, I do want to talk about a timeline just to ground everybody contextually. So I'll start at the top points, then I'll work to the bottom. So Yes Energy was founded in 2008, and then we really started to take off in about 2011, and that's when PowerX became one of our early customers. We launched a REST API product that we built in-house, but that hits our production database, and so we had query throttle limitations on it, and so we wanted something more robust, and so we launched a hosted database product in 2015. This wasn't on Snowflake. And then that became cumbersome to manage because it was like literally piping data out, and then the data in our production database didn't always match what was in those databases, and there's just a lot more to manage. And then PowerX actually became an early adopter of that as well. And then we were looking more for cloud vendors in about 2019, and that's when we started partnering with Snowflake. So we've been partners with Snowflake for about 6 years now, and that's when we launched our data share on the Snowflake marketplace, and then PowerX was an early adopter of that. And then finally in 2023, we retired our hosted database product and moved everybody over to the Snowflake product. And we actually named Snowflake Elite Partner of the Year and Partner of the Year in 2024 and Partner of the Year in 2025, which is cool. And all the meantime this is happening, like, PowerX, Ian and I, we're working on like the data side of things. Like if you look at the stuff at the bottom, there's like real life stuff that's going on, right? Weather events that are impacting, energy consumption and whether or not you have power on. So like Hurricane Sandy really impacted the east of North America in 2012, and then California wildfires, so which hits home here, led to PG&E's bankruptcy in 2019. And then Winter Storm Uri really wreaked some havoc on Texas, and that led to some regulatory changes. But, there was a lot of people really cold without power at the time. So, real life events that impact you if you're not familiar with the energy markets. And so wired to share some of the lessons learned. And so I can't cover everything right now, so I'm happy to talk after this talk as well. In terms of like sharing our data out listing strategy, we found it's nice to have a mix of marketplace and private listings. Since we're a B2B company, we transact on our paper, so we have sometimes private listings that we fulfill our data through. But that said, a lot of our data products are still in Snowflake's marketplace, so we just have a mix. And to be honest, sometimes we just haven't productionize them enough to put them public facing on the marketplace because private listing is just easier to set up. But we're getting there. And then we also have a 3-tiered approach. So for like a sales enablement piece, we find it's interesting to have a free, interesting, but not so useful set of data. So anybody doesn't have to interact with Yes, they can go get that data set and see what it looks like. They just want to check it out. And then we have like a paid private listing. And so again, you don't have to interact with Yes, you can just get basically free trial sample data that's more useful. And then we give, the full listing when we have private or marketplace listings. And then one of the reasons we went with Snowflake is because they do a really good job of being in all the major cloud regions like AWS, Azure, GCP. And we wanted to meet customers where they're at. And even though Snowflake does a great job of obfuscating that underlying cloud region, our customers are like, hey, we really want you to be in this specific cloud region. And so that cross-cloud availability was really important for us. And Snowflake enables that. And it also, reduces data egress costs when you're in the same cloud region. And then also I put this point on listing maintenance in here. So that just means that over time, Snowflake has changed how they do their listings. So become a data provider, just know that. But that's always been for the better, and we're always adapting and getting the new listing protocols. And we've never had any interruption to our existing data shares, which has been great. And then another thing we've learned is around reduced friction is, just the value of that secure data sharing. I think Christian talked about it in the keynote earlier, this no ETL, zero copy cloning of our data. I mean, that was super critical for us to actually partner with Snowflake. So we didn't have to pipe data out and manage it ourselves. Snowflake does that for us. And that was critical to reach more customers than we could have otherwise. And that flows into my second point, which is replication auto-fulfillment. So Snowflake came out with this a couple years ago, and we adopted it a couple years ago, which is with just a click of a button, we can basically, Snowflake manages this. They just push our data to any cloud region any consumer is at downstream, and then we can set up the scheduling and stuff. So it's really nice, and this is really enabled it so that the, which cloud region you're on, that conversation has just gone away pretty much completely. Another lesson learned is that we found that we have a preference against Snowflake regions with our customers, and that's because like given their inherent limitations of like read-only data, our customers tend to outgrow them. And so they need more functionality than just read-only because they're doing so much in Snowflake. Now, sometimes it just has to be that way if they're like a bank or something to where they can't have a new read-write environment. So it makes sense, but just know that like we try to get customers as a stepping stone in a read-only account because we just know that they're going to need more functionality within Snowflake. So we know that they're adopting the tool a lot. And then another cool thing about the listings is that make sure if you have a private data share to consumers that you link it to a listing, at least a private one, because that way Snowflake will provide usage telemetry data against that listing. And so you can see things like query volume, so query count, and then you can also see like what objects are being queried by the consumers as well. And then in terms of enablement, there's a lot of great stuff that, is even talked about at the keynote earlier. But we have found that we work with some companies that have old school IT, like utilities and technology. And we have found that like no matter what the IT setup, we can get Snowflake onboarded and it can work out. So that's been great. And then Snowflake provides great accelerators. Like if our data is downloaded, Snowflake basically has a button where you click it, it pops open a SQL worksheet with examples that we provided, and then customers can see how easy it is to start querying and processing and analyzing data. So it's really enticing. Our customers are really, enticed when they see that. And then Snowflake has awesome documentation, and we provide our own in terms of our data. And then we're getting more into the semantic models thing. So I was really excited about the new semantic views that were introduced earlier today, because I know that's gonna definitely make it, because if anything, we have like a really broad, big database that like customers are basically like, oh, where do I even find this stuff? Because there's just so much to sift through. And so that's where, AI can really help us. And so that really covers the how of our presentation. And now let's get to why this matters for our industry. So we're going to start with trade analytics and market forecasting. And so recall like this daily crunch to make sense of it all. You're under strict time constraints because it's partly due to physics, because energy produced has to be consumed at the same time, right? For supply and demand side. I guess batteries do make that a little bit different, but in general, this is how it is, and this is how the market behaves. So you're under this time crunch to make these decisions. And Ian talked about this a lot, but this is how Yes views solving that daily crunch. So at the top, we've got some like conceptual points, and at the bottom, some more implementation actual points. And so starting at the top left, like data sharing really accelerates business decisions and growth. And like Christian talked about a lot today earlier in the keynote of like really driving towards insights from the data and not doing distracting things, right? Like just plumbing on the data. And so that way you can spend more time doing stuff like, partying at the Snow Bash. I think that's tonight maybe, or tomorrow. And then another thing, and Ian talked about this story, is like Snowflake really brings the analytics closer to where the data is stored. And that's a really, we hear that story a lot, but it's really tried and true. And I know for me, like I get paranoid, like when I write data out, I'm like, do I have the same data? Do I have the up-to-date data? So it's nice to like, you reduce the cost of moving data, but you also bring the analytics closer to where it's stored. And we know that, Snowflake has a really robust ecosystem for that. And then I do want to point out that, being a product manager in the top right, like I do talk to data engineers like all the time. These are the type of people I get feedback from. These are the people that I work with. So really very, very technical in this role in terms of like product management. And then at the bottom, we have some examples. Like we don't do this ourselves, like our customers like PowerX do machine learning and forecasting. But we create examples. So like we'll take Snowflake's like out of the box forecasting tools and Snowpark and Python. And then what we'll do is we'll create examples of them. And like, those are like jumping off points for our customers to actually do the analysis. We have started to get more into like geospatial analytics and Snowflake notebooks that we're excited about sharing with our customers. So we actually work with Snowflake on an energy price forecasting model. Just like a lot of industries, forecasting the future state of the grid is really important. So understanding that is really important to make the best trading and market decisions. And I know, Ian, you had some points to add too.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges we have in the space, as you said, is a lot of very wide data. And our traders expect us to have that all there, even though they're not going to look at it 99.8% of the time. Mm-hmm. But when there is a weather event or another fundamental driver change in a region that may be impacting an area we trade, they want to be able to start doing analysis and answer questions right away. And so The benefit for us of going to Yes is they're pre-staging all that. Otherwise, I would be building pipelines and downloaders for things that no one actually has ever looked at PowerX, or if they have, it's only 1% of the data. So it's really important for us to offload those things that are commoditized to focus on the areas that we can. And then as Yes gets more into the analytics, they give us a starting point often on their data where we can say, great, I can take this notebook, or I can take this analysis, and then we can extend it from there. So more and more we're trying to work together so that we can have a launching off point that's further ahead than we would be otherwise. So, the other that's the kind of trading and analytical piece. From the data engineering side, for us, Power What Matters, it's about operational efficiency and innovation. I do not want my data engineers to look like this. These are a lot of different feeds pulling from APIs, websites. It's a lot of plumbing, a lot of data quality checks on the data, and data engineers are expensive. I need them to be doing more valuable work than just this basic plumbing that has been commoditized. And so the goal of working with Yes on this type of project is to reduce the overhead of downloaders and make sure when we're building a pipeline or a downloader, it's for data that's critical. We're doing something maybe we need the data faster, or we can add some value to it versus what is commoditized in the market already. I want my data engineers to look like this, and I want my analysts and users to look like this. I want them to be able to self-serve this data as much as possible. I just spoke about this, but having the data available before it's actually needed is really the whole game. Everyone knows in the energy space, there's tons of data out there. Everyone's trying to access it, but you need to have it ready and findable. Sam was talking about the semantic models. One of the challenges we have is just finding the right data point. There might be 20 different prices on the one specific location, and depending on the problem, you need to look at a particular price point. You need to be able to find that, or it's not valuable to you. And so for us, having Yes Energy already get the data there, having it structured, and then starting to do things like add semantic models just lowers the burden and allows for more self-service. Ultimately, the goal of this is to drive faster insights. It's a market. The faster you can make insights, the faster you can make decisions, the faster you can take advantage of market opportunities, and that is the objective of these markets. This gets into also beyond the data sharing piece is making sure you're doing the sharing on a platform like Snowflake. Even if I have the data and it's well organized, it can still be billions of rows. So can I throw a big warehouse at it if it is important enough to spend the money on? And that's really important to us, is that we're at a place where we can scale. We can go and get a GPU compute pool if we need it to run some analysis. We can scale on demand as we need to. And then finally, integrating where users are. When we went into our Snowflake journey, I mentioned the additional tools. I see that continuing to grow. We find now we're having to support more and more tools that the individual traders want or need, and we need to make sure that Snowflake can continue to plug into it. So far, that's been really successful for us. And it's almost become trivial for us to, set up a private key, attach it to Snowflake, and that trader's off and running with the same data model. So we see there being a large growth in the number of tools that we support. The last piece, security and governance, is still super important. When we're doing shares and why we chose Snowflake and why we work with Yes Energy on this is that they bring the data where we are. So it meets my security model where it is. I don't need to go to my security team and have a long conversation about Yes's API and where they're hosting it from and what their redundancies are. They're delivering it to me in a database, and all of my security rolls out from there. And so being able to kind of short circuit some of those conversations that at organizations can be long processes is really valuable to us. The second is availability. We're currently on Azure US West 2. Yes Energy has been able to meet us there, but we do see over time potentially going to secondary cloud environments or other regions for disaster recovery or latency or otherwise. And we know that Yes will be able to meet us there. So we can kind of assume their package will be wherever we need to be, and it gives us the flexibility to move without needing to consider, can Yes move with us or not? The third piece, system governance, it's a little bit like security. You need to do all the governance of the system for users, roles, access privileges. So when someone can offer you a share from Marketplace that just slots in like everything else, all your role-based access controls work, all the privileges set up you spent time doing, the tagging, everything you set up, if you want to put masking on it, will just work natively. And there's a huge benefit to that, especially in a small organization. I can't have DBAs going and spending time figuring out another system. It kind of fits with what they're doing day to day. And the last piece on data governance is where the governance in a share actually becomes a joint responsibility. So obviously PowerX is responsible to a certain extent for everything meeting our standards and additional quality checks, master data integration. But part of the benefit of a share is I'm actually outsourcing a lot of that problem. As much as possible, I don't want to deal with that governance. And so Sam can speak to a little bit what Yes does on top of that to help us with the data governance.
Yeah, exactly. Like I think because, Ian and his teams are focused on participating in the market, and Yes really isn't focused on that. We're really focused on the data. So we have more time and more teams and more resources dedicated to just that. So we look at data quality and make sure that it's good, and we put our stamp of approval on it, basically. So that's really our bread and butter. Like if a customer has an issue with some data, we feel that pain too. So because that's really what we do.
Perfect.
And yeah, move into our next, like what's next? So I've got the Yes stuff here in the top. So as Ian was saying, we're actually working on disaster recovery with Snowflake functionality to make that more robust and be available in more regions and just have more availability just in case of, redundancies. I know Snowflake's coming out with this cool feature called Egress Cost Optimizer. What this is for data providers, it removes the duplicative costs for sharing data out, and that'll be something that we'll really like because we share our data out to multiple cloud regions now. We manage those costs. It'd be nice. You just pay one egress cost for them all. And then I have like dynamic tables, semantic models, AI, notebooks. I mean, I've got a lot of stuff, but it's like, again, I feel like we're just behind in some case for everything that gets released, especially like the earlier keynote. But that's awesome. Like these are stuff that we've adopted internally, but we've also enabled our customers and started sharing out dynamic tables. We've got some degree of like semantic model prototypes shared out with our customers just defined for help with data discoverability. So there's a lot of cool stuff, and it's really important to stay on top of the new features with Snowflake. And I know, Ian, you had your stuff to talk about as well.
Yeah, and I mean, coming out of the keynote, one of the big ones for me was the semantic models. Like if those can start being part of the share, there's a huge value add to organizations in not having to maintain those, especially when you already have thousands of tables. I think about now, it's like you're trying to manage the data, you're trying to manage the view, and now you need to manage a semantic model on top of that. So it is an and that you're trying to figure out how do I manage that, and so working with a partner can definitely help. On our end, there's a bunch of stuff on there. The two I want to speak to is just the bottom right there, the integration with new markets. I mean, one of the reasons we go to a vendor is that our business is constantly evolving, and so Yes Energy has the data we need now, but then we also talk with them about market changes and new reports, and they're going to be on top of the data that's coming out in the future. So there's new markets being spun up in the West, and we've been assured by Yes that the data will be there from day one of the market launch, and that means we can focus on value add. And then the second one is a more technical one, but Snowflake function calling. We have some needs for really real-time data that when you're doing replication and auto fulfillment, there's a certain amount of latency that builds up from the source region. For most companies, sub 10-minute latency is fine. We have a few real-time use cases that wouldn't allow that. But what we're looking at doing is actually doing external calls from within Snowflake to the Yes Energy API, which would give us that real-time data, and then unifying that immediate real-time need with kind of our longer-term historical. And so it's kind of a niche function, but I think it's a really neat way to unify your data to get that real-time and longer term. So some final takeaways, and then we're happy to kind of stick around and answer questions. One I think Sam and I both mentioned is stay on top of new features and capabilities. It's constantly changing. You will need to adapt your data lifecycle to these new features. You don't really have a choice, so make sure you're staying on top of them so you can get ahead of that and figure out how to adapt your lifecycle to all the new objects and things that are coming your way, and work with your partners on that. We've had great partnerships throughout with Snowflake partners, and with their data vendors. And I really think there's value in not just treating them as like blank vendors I send a check to. You get a lot out of working as a partnership together. When Yes was going into Snowflake, we were able to talk about how they're going to structure the data, how they're going to do replication. We were able to trade stories on what vendors they were getting for change data replication, what latencies they were looking at. There's knowledge there that can be gained from these vendors. And so we've really appreciated the partnership with Yes, and it's something I would encourage all of you to do.
Yeah, well said, Ian. And just like partnerships with customers, like we are partnerships with Snowflake to enable our customers to get value out of the data. And I think that's really important because Yes views it the same way too. We view ourselves as like trusted partners with our customers and not just a data vendor you write a check to. So that's well said. Last thing I'll say too is like, hey, there's a lot of vendors on the Snowflake marketplace, and there's some that I just come on all the time. And so make your life simpler by leveraging those data points. And you can actually, if you use that QR code, you can check out what Yes's marketplace listings look like just to see what they look like, or if you want to download them yourself. So that's what we had for today. And so thank you all for attending our presentation on how PowerX leverages Yes Energy on the Snowflake marketplace. Thank you.